Good morning. What does online problem gambling, housing affordability, respectful maternity care, or autism in Latino children have in common? There are just a few of the intriguing topics you will learn about today. Welcome to the 31st McNair Closing Symposium. My name is Shakura Bakari Kozar, and my staff and I greet you and thank you for supporting our 11 scholars who will share their research findings with you. The McNair Scholars Program at Wichita State has been supporting first-generation and limited and underrepresented students for over the years to pursue a graduate education with the goal of obtaining doctoral degrees. Today, we celebrate the academic achievements of our scholars and their research mentors as they have put in hard work and made sacrifices to be here today. Just a second. We celebrate the legacy and resilience of our McNair program as well since its inception in 1995. Over the year, McNair scholars, including myself, have made contributions in various levels of academia, made contributions to research and industry, and supported the ongoing challenges that TRIO and GEAR programs face in an ever-changing political climate. However, today, we are celebrating our scholars. We are so proud of your commitment to research and your goal of completing your studies. I know it wasn't easy. And research mentors, we are so thankful and grateful for guiding our scholars through the research process, offering instruction and guidance, and a little bit of patience to get them to this point. I know it wasn't easy. Just the same, we thank you all. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our division leader, Associate Vice Provost of Pre-K-12 Engagement, Dr. Alicia Thompson, who would like to share a few words.
Good morning, everyone. All right, I'll do it again. Good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, but we got to wake up because I'm really excited to be here. It is an honor to be here with you today, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the McNair Scholars Symposium. For many years, the McNair Scholars Program has been part of the fabric of Wichita State University. It's opened doors, it's created opportunities, and it prepares students to take their place in either their graduate programs or in research programs and spaces where their voices and their ideas are needed. And today, we have the privilege of seeing your work come to fruition. To our McNair scholars, today is really all about you. What we see today is just the research. We see the presentations and we see all of your finished work, but what we don't see is all of the hours and the sacrifices, the challenges and the discipline that it took to get here. You have done more than prepare a research project. You're preparing yourself for graduate school, for leadership, and all of the other opportunities that are awaiting you. And you did not do this journey alone. And as she stated before, to the research mentors, raise your hand, mentors. There's mentors in here. Hey, mentor, how are you? Thank you. Thank you so very much for giving your time and sharing your expertise and seeing the potential in the scholars. The time that you invested and the knowledge that you share went far beyond what we see in this classroom today, so thank you for your time. That is also why we work to advocate for the TRIO programs. We do that on a regular basis, and we don't simply want our students to have access to opportunities. We advocate to make sure that they are supported, prepared, and empowered to strive when these opportunities come their way. So scholars, as we share your work today, stand confidently in what you know and who you are. Your research matters, your ideals matter, and your voice matters even more. You belong in every room with your gifts, your preparation, and your hard work, those rooms that you will get into because of your work. And I will leave you with this. Don't just prepare to enter the rooms you've dreamed about. Prepare to change them when you get there. Welcome to the McNair Symposium, and we are proud of you, and I'm excited and cannot wait to see your work.
Scholars, are you ready? Before we get started, we just have a few little housekeeping things. Guests here, the restrooms are out the door, down the end of the hall, and to your right. If you need to take a phone call, please step outside of the room and take that call. And then when you come back in, if you can wait till the end of the student's presentation to re-enter. Okay? We're getting ready to start block one. I would like to call up our moderator, Mary Harber, to come up, and we'll get things going.
All right. My name is Mary Harber. I am the research coordinator for McNair, and I would like to introduce our first presenter, Ms. Cynthia Pizzini.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Pizzini, and I'm a recent graduate of the Barton School of Business and a proud McNair Scholar. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my research mentor, Dr. Nigel Soria, and the staff and everyone who helped with this project at the McNair office. My research is titled Beyond Affordability: What Renters Value in Housing and Community. This project is especially meaningful to me because my long-term goal is to develop affordable housing communities. As I began learning about housing policy, I realized that conversations almost always focused on one question: how do we make housing more affordable? That's certainly important, but I was wondering, are we not asking the right questions? I feel that the days of the take it or leave it affordable housing developer needs to come to an end. If we're going to build affordable housing anyway, why not ask the people that we're building the housing for what they would like? That's the question that guided this research. Housing policy has traditionally measured success by the number of affordable units produced. But affordability alone doesn't determine whether people feel satisfied with where they live. Every housing development requires hundreds of decisions. Developers decide how much space to provide, what amenities to include, how communities are designed, and where to invest their limited resources. Surprisingly, renters themselves are rarely part of this conversation. So my study focused on two questions. First, what housing and community features do renters value most? And second, could cooperative housing serve as a viable alternative to traditional rental housing? Cooperative housing, for those that don't know, is a model where residents collectively pool their resources and they own and govern their own communities, helping create long-term affordability and stability rather than relying entirely on the rental market. Once I understood what renters valued, I wanted to know whether this alternative housing model could better deliver those priorities. To answer those questions, I conducted a quantitative survey using Qualtrics. 38 active renters participated, representing a range of ages and income levels. The survey took about 15 minutes to complete online and asked about demographic characteristics, current housing satisfaction, housing priorities, and perceptions of cooperative housing. Because this was a relatively small study, my goal was not to draw broad conclusions. Instead, I wanted to identify meaningful patterns that could help guide future research with larger groups of renters. Before we look at the results, I wanted to give you a quick snapshot of who participated. The sample skewed younger, but included renters from every adult age group and a wide range of income levels. Nearly half of the respondents reported household incomes between $25,000 and $74,999, giving us valuable insight into the experiences of renters facing today's affordability challenges. The first research question asked was what renters value most when choosing housing. The results confirmed that affordability remains the foundation. It received the highest average rating, 4.79 out of 5. Personal safety ranked second, followed by interior living space. So what surprised me was that affordability remained almost equally important across every income level, even among renters earning more than $75,000. That tells us something important, and it's that housing affordability is no longer only a low-income issue. Financial pressure is affecting renters across much of today's housing market. Another interesting finding was that social connection ranked last during the housing search. And that doesn't mean that people don't value community. Rather, it suggests that when renters are searching for housing, they are first trying to meet their basic needs: affordability, safety, and functionality. After identifying the overall priorities, I wanted to know which specific design features mattered most to these renters. The results showed that renters consistently favored practical features that improved daily life. Laundry facilities, as you can see, ranked highest by a wide margin, followed by storage space, natural lighting, private outdoor space, and energy efficiency. Community preferences showed a similar pattern. Safety features, parking, and green space ranked much higher than amenities like community rooms or gardens. For developers, this reinforces that thoughtful, functional design often provides more value than expensive amenities that residents may rarely use. The second half of my study explored cooperative housing. As I expected, many participants were very unfamiliar with the concept, almost 70%. But once the model was explained, the results became much more interesting. Half of all respondents said they would consider applying if the monthly cost was comparable to what they currently pay in rent. Interest was strongest among renters earning between $25,000 and less than $50,000 a year. I think of this group as the missing middle. They often earn too much to qualify for traditional housing assistance, but still struggle with rising housing costs. So that suggests cooperative housing may be a good alternative to fill the gap that existing affordable housing programs often miss. I also wanted to look at what would be motivators for people to consider cooperative housing and what are some of the barriers. So I believe the results from this section were among some of the most important findings. The biggest motivator for cooperative housing wasn't surprising. People wanted their rent to stay lower. And long-term stability and protection from eviction were also major motivators, along with the opportunity to build equity. What surprised me was the biggest barrier. It wasn't money, as I had hypothesized. It was the concern about interpersonal conflicts among neighbors. That changes the conversation. So we often assume financing is the biggest challenge, but these findings suggest that successful cooperative housing depends just as much on strong governance as it does on strong financial planning. In other words, governance becomes a big part of the infrastructure. So like any study, this research has limitations. The sample included only 38 renters, so the findings should not be generalized to the broader population. And one limitation I noticed was the sample skewed much younger, as I mentioned earlier. But I believe that's largely because my survey was only available online and more accessible to younger participants. So in future research, I would like to expand the sample by combining those online surveys with in-person data collection at places like community centers, libraries, and nonprofits. I believe that this approach would help capture a broader range of renters, particularly older adults, and provide a more representative sample for the future. So this research points to 3 practical implications. First, affordable housing must move beyond simply reducing rent. People also value safety, stability, and thoughtful design. Second, cooperative housing shows meaningful promise, particularly for that missing middle household who often falls outside existing housing programs. And finally, successful affordable housing requires more than quality construction. It requires systems that help people live together in harmony. I believe that this project is that our housing crisis isn't just a financial problem. It's also a design problem, a stability problem, and a governance problem. As someone who hopes to develop affordable housing communities in the future, this research helped me see that I can design communities for people that not only they can afford, but they would love to call home. I just hope that these findings will help developers, nonprofit organizations, and policymakers think more intentionally about what affordable housing should accomplish beyond affordability. Thank you. Are you moving it? Oh, got it. Fancy.
Any questions for Cynthia?
First of all, great job.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. What would be your message to policymakers, and then what was your time frame? Because you're this 38. I mean, not that that's bad. I mean, it's okay to
Right.
do a preliminary study, but what was your time frame? Why was it so short?
It wasn't short. It was fairly long. I was surprised also. I went to community events. I engaged the community. We were talking about this earlier. In the demographic that I targeted, there were a few different zip codes, 67214, and in northern Nomar. I was in the community a lot, and unfortunately, I did have a lot of people have interest, but they would take the survey and not finish the survey. So they would stop kind of like in between. So I had a lot of people start the survey, but I didn't have complete results. So there were unfortunately, a lot of data that I could not use. So yeah, once it was cleaned, we used it was a much smaller set. It was almost half, actually. So yes, so that's to answer that question. That's why the in-person, I believe, where you can explain things and maybe have someone who can interpret for different communities would be incredible. Yeah. And your message to policymakers? There's more than one way to skin a cat. And tax incentives are not the end-all and be-all. You really need to engage the community more, because if we went into the community, and especially with this cooperative idea, I believe there are a lot of people who would absolutely invest. Yeah.
I have a question for you. Are there any cooperative housing opportunities in Wichita already?
There is a really good one in Lawrence, Kansas. There are not many in Wichita. I grew up with cooperative housing because I'm originally from New York, and it's the land of cooperative housing. So when I don't see it everywhere, it's kind of weird to me because it works and it's been proven to work. It's about education. So you have to educate the community about the benefits. It's not for everyone. As we saw, a lot of people want their own space, and cooperative housing is very much about building community. So you have to be comfortable living with people and amongst people. But I think in Wichita it would be amazing because of the multi-generational aspect that you can add into like a cooperative housing community. I think that would be very amazing here.
All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Sure. I get a bag? Oh, sure, I'll share my plans after graduation. Well, not after graduation, because I'm already graduated, technically. In 24 days, I'll be heading to Washington, D.C. I am going to American University to get my master's in public administration and hopefully do some lobbying, housing lobbying when I'm there, and then decide from there. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. We'll see.
Right. I would love to introduce and thank you, Cynthia. Lovely presentation. Our next presenter is Braden Miller.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Braden Miller. I work with my faculty mentor, Dr. Charles Brendan Clark, exploring some of the risk factors that put people most at risk for developing a problem with gambling. So as you may know, gambling is a very popular recreational activity in America. In fact, you or someone you know may enjoy gambling in their spare time. The truth of the matter is that America has the most gambling venues in the world at 2,100 venues. And a study by the American Psychiatric Association, a poll of 2,200 people, found that 28% of adults gamble online daily. And if you watch sports, it's no secret to you that gambling has been growing. You've probably been bombarded with ads for sports betting. In fact, a study found that in modern sports betting broadcasts, an average of 3.5 gambling advertisements are featured per broadcasting minute. Total sports betting wagers increased from 4.9 billion in 2017 to 121 billion in 2023. That is a huge increase in the amount of wagers being placed in just 5 years. Now, not all gambling is bad, but some people are bound to develop a problem. And a study by DeLosa and Brown in 2024 found that about 5.3% of North Americans can be classified as problem gamblers. So we looked at the literature to see what puts people most at risk and what we already know about problem gambling. We know that there is a connection between gambling and social media. We know that online gamblers specifically are 10 times more likely to develop a problem with gambling compared to land-based or in-person gamblers. We know that gambling apps share addictive features with social media, such as variable reinforcement schedules, which is when you don't know when the positive reward is coming, and sunk cost fallacies, which is when you invest so much time or money or some other resource into something that you think it must pay off eventually. Approximately 237 social media ads are posted each day by the 4 dominant US brands for gambling. We know that due to these shared addictive features and proximity online, we think it's very important to study the relationship between social media addiction and problem gambling. We also know that there is a diverse amount of literature about the personality of gamblers. We know that that according to Big 5 personality traits, gamblers tend to have higher levels of neuroticism. This is a predisposition to experiencing negative emotions. They also have lower conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness to experience. We also know that problem gamblers typically have comorbid personality disorders. Cluster B personality disorders specifically, which are characterized by difficulties in interpersonal relationships. These are things such as narcissism and borderline personality disorder. While a lot of research has been conducted on the specific personality profiles of gamblers in general, as gambling enters into the online medium, it's important to look at the personalities of online gamblers specifically. And let's talk a little bit about the history of gambling disorder and problem gambling. So actually before the release of the DSM-5 gambling disorder was classified as an impulse control disorder. But studies showed that there are actually a lot more similarities between substance use disorder and gambling disorder than previously conceived. And so with the release of the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, it was reclassified under substance use disorders under non-substance related disorders due to shared neurobiological similarities in the brains between substance users and gamblers, as well as similarities in presentation according to Griffith's model of addiction, such as salience or the capacity to think about the substance or behavior all the time, withdrawal, conflict, mood modification, and tolerance, and so on. And while this research has been conducted, it leads us to believe that there is more important research to be conducted in the similarities between substance use disorder and behavioral addiction. So given our review of the literature, what questions stood out to us? What did we want to look at? Well, we had one hypothesis stand out. We believed that problem gambling and social media would be well correlated. Our second hypothesis was that prominent predictors of substance use disorder would emerge as predictors of problem gambling when loaded into a linear regression model. We also believed that cluster B personality traits and self-esteem would predict for problem gambling when loaded into the same linear regression model. So how did we test this? Well, we collected 511 participants by hosting our survey on an online task hosting website called Amazon's Mechanical Turk. We created the survey via Qualtrics. Let's talk a little bit about the demographics of our participants. Our participants were closer to middle-aged, 34 and a half years old typically, with a standard deviation of 7.85. The majority of our participants were male, however, there were a good number who were women. Unfortunately, the vast majority of respondents were white, and so we were unable to collect a representative sample. The survey took about 15 minutes to complete. It surveyed aspects such as personality, self-esteem, IQ, gambling, and social media addiction. Participants were compensated $2 for participating in the study. So let's talk a little bit about our results. The first thing I want to talk about are the demographics of our online gamblers, or specifically what they like to gamble on. We found that the most popular form of gambling was online casino games, followed by sports betting, and then online poker competitions, gotcha games / loot boxes, and other. For those who don't know, gotcha games and loot boxes are a form of video game gambling where you pay money to receive random in-game rewards. We also asked our sports bettors what sports they liked to gamble on the most, and we found that football was the most popular, followed by soccer, basketball, baseball, and other, one elected to specify boxing. For our correlational analysis, we actually found a lot of significant correlations between problem gambling and our various variables. But we're going to focus on the correlation between problem gambling and social media addiction. We did, in fact, find a significant correlation there. The analysis also revealed significant correlations between several personality traits, such as narcissism, histrionic personality, impulsivity, big five traits, and so on in problem gambling. Interestingly enough, we did not find that IQ or extroversion were significantly associated with problem gambling. Now let's talk about our linear regression model. Our linear regression analysis found that our cluster B personality traits were significantly predictive of online gambling. It also found that our prominent predictors of substance use disorder, that being age of first use, age, IQ, were prominent predictors. However, sex was not found to be a prominent predictor. So what does all of that mean? Well, for our first hypothesis, that was confirmed. It does seem like problem gambling and social media addiction are well correlated. As far as our second hypothesis goes, it did in fact seem as though the most prominent predictors of substance use disorder emerged as predictors of gambling, except for sex, which was especially interesting because what the literature seems to show is that men are more likely than women to have a problem with gambling and more likely to engage in gambling in the first place. For our third hypothesis, we did find that self-esteem and cluster B personality traits seem to predict problem gambling even when controlling for common predictors of addiction. So, in conclusion, we found that individuals who experience issues with social media seem to be predisposed to also have issues with problem gambling. This is likely due to shared addictive features between the two, as well as proximity online. We found a robust personality profile which seems to predict for online problem gambling. These individuals possess higher traits of the grandiose subscale of narcissism, as well as lower self-esteem. We hypothesize that these individuals seek external reinforcement through gambling, which they get through winning, and when they lose, they chase their losses. Interestingly enough, the same individuals were found to be lower in traits of the exhibitionism subscale of narcissism. We hypothesized that if they were higher in these traits, that they would gamble in person where people could watch them win. These traits still emerge as being predictive, even when controlling for prominent predictors of substance use disorder like age of first use, age, impulsivity, IQ, sex, and age. I will now be taking any questions.
Any questions?
Did you explore any interventions or things that could help reduce people to getting addicted to particularly online gambling?
That was not the focus of our study. In terms of interventions, there are forms of therapy that can help reduce addiction. For example, ACT has been found to be a useful intervention for addiction. That was not particularly the focus of our study, though.
What was the most surprising factor you found while doing your research?
It was definitely that sex was not predictive of problem gambling. The literature would seem to indicate that men are more likely to have an issue with problem gambling, so the fact that our study did not find sex to be predictive may be indicative that the gender gap is narrowing. That by far was very surprising to us. It was also surprising to us how much our sample seemed to have a problem with gambling. Many of them were scoring well over a score of 8 on the problem gambling severity index is enough to be classified as a problem gambler. Many were scoring higher than that.
Oh, thank you so much. So my question is about personality traits. Can you speak a little bit more about how you went about identifying the personality traits?
Sure. So essentially, in terms of like Big Five, one of the big theories of why gamblers seem to have more traits of neuroticism or predisposition to negative emotions is that they may use gambling as a means of coping with that predisposition to negative emotions. And actually, literature seems to show this, that people who gamble actually something called experiential avoidance actually moderates relationships between certain variables in gambling. So it seems that individuals who are more likely to want to escape from negative experiences are more likely to develop a problem with gambling. In terms of cluster B personality disorders, that link between gambling and cluster B personality disorders, it's been well studied in the literature. And so we just wanted to take it a step further and get really specific and see if there were any differences between the personality traits of online gamblers and previous literature conducted on gamblers. It's interesting. I think the main reason why individuals who struggle with these interpersonal personality disorders seek out gambling is to get a reinforcement that they can't get from within. People feel special when they win. It feels really, really good. And so it's just one way of coping with a lower sense of internal self-esteem, I think. For problem gambling? For personality, we used a 10-item version of the Big Five inventory, and then we used what's called the Personality Belief Questionnaire for other traits, and then we also used the Dark Triad for narcissism.
Well, thank you again. And I think that's
No, he's not.
Thank you, Braden, for a wonderful presentation. And our next presenter is Ellie Nunez.
Good morning. So today I'm going to be talking about EMG-based detection and quantification of mirror movements after stroke. I'm a biomedical engineering major who studied under Dr. Gao in the biomedical engineering department. So first off, what are mirror movements? So when you think about grabbing something with your right hand, your left hand starts squeezing also. And that doesn't happen to you normally. So imagine every single time you're trying to do something with your right hand or your left hand, whichever one is dominant, your other hand starts doing the same exact movement. And that's exactly what a mirror movement is in simple terms. And this happens because stroke disrupts the brain's ability to inhibit the opposite hemisphere during one-sided tasks. So what that means is in your brain, you're sending signals from your left hemisphere to your right hand, and then your right hemisphere is sending signals to your left hand. So after a stroke and you get these lesions in your brain, the signal begins to leak over to the other hemisphere, causing that signal to leak over to both sides, not just one. So you'll still have that strong gripping in your right hand, but then your left hand might have a smaller movement, which is a little less force, because it's not getting that full signal that you normally would be getting on your right side. It's kind of just leaking over because of the stroke lesion. And this can be very hard for patients because a lot of the patients have reported that with everyday tasks like buttoning their shirts, cooking, grabbing stuff, just doing their normal tasks like anybody would think to do, they can't. They're having to struggle, they need assistance. It would be super frustrating trying to do anything with your dominant hand and having to rely on someone else because your other hand cannot stop moving. Or sometimes even they begin to get Parkinson's after having strokes just because the signal just doesn't know how to stop. Oh, and mirror movements also tell you how severe the stroke was and how deep your lesion is. So the deeper your lesion in your brain is after stroke, is the more severe your mirror movements are going to be. So first off, what is EMG? It's called electromyography, and it reads electrical signals off your muscle. And this is why I picked it. So honestly, researchers have used functional MRI, electroencephalography to study mirror movements at the neural level. And those tools are really valuable. They give you the neural insight. It shows us if the bilateral cortical activation is happening, if your hemispheres are communicating or not communicating. But neither one tells us what's happening at the muscle or why exactly your muscle is contracting or not contracting. So that's exactly where surface EMG comes in. It directly measures involuntary muscle activation in your resting limb and in your activation limb. And sometimes those activations are so subtle that you can't tell by just visually annotating. So looking at me right now, it's like, oh, can you tell that I'm moving my left hand? It's slightly moving, but you can't really tell if it's getting that signal. And EMG can tell you if you're even having the most minor signal in your muscle. And that's something that helps more than just visually annotating your patients or your participants in your study. In one of et al.'s study, he's confirmed that using surface EMG with stroke patients show significantly greater involuntary contralateral activation than healthy controls. So what that means is using EMG and EEG, one of the other neural mechanisms behind it, you are able to see the full picture of what's going on in the brain, if the signal's going down, and if your muscle's even activating. And sometimes even if their muscles atrophy, they're trying to squeeze and it's just not happening. But we can get that electrical signal down at their muscle that they're trying to, or it's sending the signal, they're just not able to act on it. So for our data collection recorded from 5 participants with a history of stroke, we use a BioPAC system with bilateral surface EMG electrodes. They were placed on the forearm flexor muscles with both arms simultaneously. As you can see on the screen with the electrodes, we had them in line with the muscle fibers, 2 on the forearm, 1 back on the elbow. And they had to do 3 blocks total, but it's 15 squeezes per hand and randomized using a CyclePi visual cue program. EMG1 captured the active squeezing limb, so that's going to be your active hand, the one that's your most dominant. And then EMG2 was your limb that's supposed to be resting and not getting any activation at all. and both channels were recorded at about 2,000 hertz. So I created a custom Python program because I was like, how are we going to get through all this data? How are we going to be able to do this and also make it clinically relevant? I mean, you can manually add all this data, but what's going to make it repeatable and that other people can also use as well? So if anybody wanted to do this study after me, I could easily send them the program I created and they could tweak it or just use it again how I had it. So my custom program, you would load up the file. It would have bandpass filters. It has the hertz to be able to isolate all these different signals. And it actually detects the squeezes. So instead of having to go back and manually take every single squeeze that you had, because sometimes it would miss them. I mean, it's hard enough for you normally healthy to be able to, hurry and squeeze on a screen. Then now somebody after a stroke, they're gonna have a delayed reaction and not gonna have as quick as a reaction as somebody normally would. So I have an RMS envelope. It also computes your mirror ratio. So your mirror ratio computes how severe your mirror movements are. So again, you want to know how severe your mirror movements are to be able to tell us how severe your stroke was. And then you'll see on the next slide what the program spits out at the end. It's a graph of your mirror movement score. So for our results is what did we find? The program successfully produced mirror movement severity scores for all participants. We saw clear differentiation from across the groups. Participants with low ratios below 0.1 showed minimal resting limb activation, essentially a quiet signal during squeezings, and participants in a moderate range would show detectable coactivation around 20% of the force of their active limb, and our highest severity participant showed a resting limb firing over 30% of the squeezing's hand strength, which is very consistent with the literature that describes significant post-stroke mirror movements, and importantly a lot of them were not as visible watching the participants. So looking at participants, we really weren't seeing much squeezing on their left hand, but the EMG was saying something different. So that just shows that you can't always just look at a patient, look at a participant, and try to guess if they're squeezing. It's nice to have that clinical value and that clinical relevance and having that baseline. So here you can see a graph. So this is one of our graphs from our mild severity case, where they only got 20 squeezes in, and you can see on one of the squeezes it even went up to a 60% force. They didn't get all 30 squeezes, but that was pretty normal. And as you can see on the side, you can see that if it's less than 10% of the force, it's just a low group. Our control actually had a little bit more mirror movement, which is kind of crazy. I think theirs was like 0.5%. And then a moderate group is gonna be at 15%, and a high group is gonna be 30% or above. And again, it's just very reproducible for future studies especially if we're gonna have more participants. So what makes this approach meaningful is a few things. It removes observer bias. You're getting a number, not a clinical impression. Second, it captures subclinical activity, things that wouldn't show up in a standard evaluation. Third, it operationalizes what fMRI and EMG research has shown at the neural level. You can see how the muscle level consequence at the cortical disruptions. You can kind of see what's really going down at your muscle is that if you're not squeezing or you're squeezing, you're not squeezing enough. And you can see the muscle level consequence ultimately of strokes. And practically speaking, surface EMG with automated analysis doesn't require a scanner or specialized infrastructure. It's really realistic and can be used in rehabilitation clinics because EMG is very affordable, unlike electroencephalography or functional MRI. So of course, there are limitations. Our sample size is small, 5 participants, so we really can't make broad clinical claims yet. But surface EMG can also pick up signals from adjacent muscles, which could affect precision, and our detection thresholds were set using a general approach rather than calibrating per each individual. And going forward, I like to validate the mirror ratios against established clinical scales, like the Fugel-Meyer assessment, and apply this across therapy sessions to track recovery over time and integrate EPNIRS data so we can collect the data, we can collect neural data and connect that to the muscle scores so we can really see the cortical changes down all the way from neural to muscle. So in conclusion, this project demonstrates that bilateral SEMG with an automated Python pipeline can objectively detect and quantify mirror movements in stroke survivors. We can produce a continuous severity score, differentiate between individuals, and do all this without specialized equipment or manual annotation. The broader implication is this could be a practical tool for stroke assessment and rehabilitation monitoring, and potentially for driving EMG-based therapeutic systems down the line to be able to help every community, not just those who can afford stroke rehabilitation care. Thank you.
Great job presenting. Do you do any kind of survey before they come into to gather like just brief demographics like their age, and then do you do a post-assessment?
Yeah, so their pre-assessment.
What does that look like?
To get into be able to get participants, you had to have an ischemic stroke. Well, if you have a hemorrhagic stroke, most likely you're not surviving, but you have to have an ischemic stroke, and you had to be 6 months post-stroke. So you had at least a little bit of rehabilitation, you were a little more active, more there. And we also had, so it would give you your demographic, your age, if you could follow commands, because didn't want to have participants in the study that, I mean, if they're not being able to be cued or be told to squeeze or not squeeze, so it's really hard to get that clinical assessment on them if they're really not there, you know. And sadly, that's something that's really hard with strokes, is that the severity for each different patient, each different person is, I mean, it's leaps and bounds different. Yeah, we did post ones. I'm not continuing this research next year, but I know the lab is, and they're going to get more participants. This was kind of just like a pilot study, so we could get started, and then we're going to track their rehabilitation, because the ultimate goal is stroke rehabilitation, so that we have an easier way to track their mirror movements and their muscle activation. So this kind of is a good starter for them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So because this is a pilot project, have you had any other people interested? Because it seems that you are creating a new program, an app. Are you planning to market it, or what are you planning to do with this outcome?
I'm actually leaving it to my mentor and see if she'll use it, but I actually sent it to one of my friends up in UT Austin. They were also doing stroke research, and they're very good at coding, so I sent it up to them, and they're doing an EEG study, and they were using it to filter out their EMG signals and then connect it to their EEG. So I know they added a little bit more code, but I actually sent it out. I didn't think about marketing my app or, patenting it or anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Wonderful. And our next presenter is Garrett Knight.
Hello, my name is Garrett Knight, and I am a senior at Wichita State University. I am working under Dr. Aaron O'Brien in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and this is pitch presumption, the spatiotemporal, physiological, and cultural dimensions of musical expectation violations. First, I want to start off by kind of building what is a musical expectation, and to do that, I have a pretty popular song that I think actually answers this pretty well. That moment that you saw the shatter and kind of coined it the Dochi effect, because it kind of completely violates our musical expectations. And so how does musical expectation fit into how we hear music? The answer kind of lies into the fact that our brains are really paranoid. In the real world, we hear a very unsudden or very sudden, unexpected sound, and we kind of see it as danger, and it activates our fight or flight. With that, in the context of music, we have to now decipher between fight or flight or mispredicted pleasure. And that kind of shows that our central nervous system is a relentless prediction machine. So how do our brains know what to guess? It does this through something called statistical learning. Just by growing up and taking the world around you in, it creates our cultural lens. And this shows that the absorption of the auditory world around you isn't passive. Instead, we're actively generating predictions to anticipate sensory inputs before they arrive, known as active forecasting. So, how is this studied? We have to look at this in aspects of neuroimaging in some of these studies. We have single modal or multimodal, one system or two systems. And they're determined by about 3 different topics. We have our space, this is where we're looking at our regions of interest, our functional aspect, our metabolics, our time aspect, which is temporal, when something happens, and then our modalities. This is kind of how we look at something. And so this is where it gets a little bit trickier. So we have our structural functioning, or structural modality, and this is where you look at the building, if you're looking at the actual structure of what something is. Then you have our functional, this is metabolic, this is like blood flow going through our brains and stuff like that. If you're looking in a building, it's the people moving around, the water flowing through the pipes. And then we have electrical, this is the like EEG and stuff like that, looking at electrical response, so it's like looking at an electricity meter. And so here I have an example of how MRI actually does both functional and structural imaging. But because MRI takes quite a while to receive the data, telling when something happened is more difficult, making it more temporally just inaccurate. But EEG, event-related potentials, have very high temporal responses down to the millisecond. And so this is where it kind of gets a little tricky with EEG. Localization is difficult without interpretive data, making telling where something happened more difficult. And so if our central nervous system hates being wrong, why do we actively seek out music that constantly tricks us? This goes back to what I mentioned about real-world dangers and disruptions making us think there's dangers. Evolutionarily, our brains want to minimize unpredictability and sensory surprise to make sure that we're staying alive and maintain our biological equilibrium. Music also plays a huge deception, and it's also just honestly, in my opinion, a very beautiful trick, and it's engineering these safe and decipherable prediction errors, turning what we would usually see as a survival threat into a manageable cognitive puzzle, leading into our dopaminergic payoff. This is whenever those prefrontal networks successfully repair the shattered musical expectations, and our corticostriatal loop releases our dopamine, and the intrinsic biological reward for learning and updating your internal predictive models occurs. This resolves the core paradox of music perception. The physiological stress and cognitive effort of being wrong is the exact mechanism that drives aesthetic pleasure. And this leads to our objective of how we research this. Systemically, we want to map how science characterizes musical expectation violations and synthesize these into a proposed methodology of maps, take the methodologies, put them into a proposed map. And that's proposed as the 5 stages of immersive prediction violation. This we want to demonstrate as aesthetic pleasure to require a fully embodied cascade. And so to achieve this, we want to uncover exactly where the literature is coming up short, but we need a highly transparent approach. And so with this in my research, we kind of did a pretty big scoping review, sticking to our JBI methodology and our PRISMA scoping review guidelines, working towards that transparent and reproducible evidence extraction, while also using our PCC, our population concept context framework, to find our adult typical listeners, which was our population. Our concept was the objective neurophysiological and autonomic responses that were to musical prediction error, with our context being in both the lab and kind of out in the wild listening to normalized music. And so we had a 3-step search strategy across PubMed, PsycInfo, and Scopus, specifically targeting functional neuroimaging with simultaneous peripheral autonomic biosensors. Then we filtered out unrelated tasks, structural-only imaging, and excluded clinical populations like traumatic brain injury in order to completely isolate the baseline architecture of a healthy prediction machine. This resulted in about 66 finalized studies successfully capturing the true mind-body reality of musical surprise, and served as the final data set that we built our foundation off for the proposed 5 stages of immersive prediction violation, which we'll actually kind of go through next instead of me just regurgitating about 66 different articles to you. So I summarized them into these frameworks. Before a musical expectation can be shattered, it has to be built. This brings us to our first step of the framework. Occurring about 100 milliseconds into hearing a sound, your superior temporal gyrus and primary auditory cortex are going to work. They're extracting the fundamental features and using your cultural lens to continuously generate forecasts about the possible upcoming notes and rhythms. And this puts the listener into a highly predictable state. This is autonomically reflected in the body like a steady heart rate. Now on to stage 2, just about 150 to 250 milliseconds after the unexpected change, this is where that moment of catastrophic failure of internal predictive models occurs. Your frontal networks are shouting alarm bells at you saying, hey, you're wrong. But the cool thing about this part is that you don't actually register this because this is all happening preconsciously at this point. Before you've realized there was a mistake, your cortex has actually already registered the mathematical error, and it's triggered an immediate systemic autonomic survival reflex known as the bradycardia of attention, and that's the deceleration of your heart rate involuntarily. But the brain can't stay in that chaotic state of unresolved chaotic conflict, bringing us to stage 3. About 300 to 600 milliseconds post-violation, our brain is now switching from a passive receiver into an active, conscious problem solver. The heavy lifting is now on our top-down executive networks, but unlike stage 2, functional neural imaging shows that this repair requires immense metabolic fuel that can be measured during syntax reanalysis. Which leads us into our stage 4, the moment where our brain is kind of getting that meaning from the response out. So we're now on our midline networks with the anterior cingulate cortex, our cingulate and our medial prefrontal cortex with communication with our nucleus accumbens and corticostriatal loop. This is about 400 milliseconds all the way up to 15 seconds after the musical violations, where your brain is now performing a review of decision and semantic emotional meaning of error. Then, once successfully resolved with the corticostriatal loop, your corticostriatal loop floods the system with dopamine, causing that chills response that we often experience. Stage 5 is where the dust settles and we're finding our new rhythm. About 600 milliseconds and on, you're no longer actively calculating this error. The intense metabolic fire is now moving from your prefrontal cortex back into your supplementary motor area, your premotor cortices, and your default mode network. This is also where your vestibular and sensory motor systems are now taking over and physically re-entraining to the repaired flow. That moment of groove, meaning the physical impulse to move and entrain to the music, is now restored. So now that I've explained kind of what the data was telling us, I want to look at where the research gaps were some of the most prominent. About 45 of our 66 articles only isolated down to the cortical processing aspect, overlooking the body. Then we had 12 studies account for the extended ecological auditory environment, but only 6 also measured the concurrent physiological arousal in the body. However, 3 were the only 3 to actually achieve the full embodied, embedded, extended, and inactive 4E integration with simultaneous tracking of cortical networks, autonomic peripheral responses, and ecological context to capture the complete mind-body reality of musical surprise. So this kind of shows us that modern neuroscience is missing the forest for the trees. Artificially separating the brain from the body and relying on sterile artificial tone bursts, science is studying a disembodied listener. We're treating music perception as a sterile intellectual exercise rather than a visceral reflex. This fundamentally undermines the entire predictive coding loop. Why? The biological reflex of error detection is universal, but the actual musical rules we expect are entirely constructed by our cultural exposure. You can't examine an individual's music expectation violation if you don't allow the listener to develop their own cultural lens to break in the first place. And so to understand why music feels good, we have to put the listener back together. This is where the brain is now acting as that committee machine, taking the objective mathematical error of a broken cultural rule and weighing it against the subjective, visceral feeling of your racing heart. So if we accept that music perception requires a synthesis of brain, body, and culture, how should the field of cognitive neuroscience adapt? So to adapt it, it requires a complete methodological recomposition. I love that photo. And so my current investigation that I'm working on is designed on viewing both the spatial temporal sequence of surprise together, deploying EEG for the preconscious error detection with FNIRS for the sustained metabolic burn of cognitive repair, and using peripheral biosensors to verify bodily responses affirming that visceral autonomic arousal. Because our internal schemas are built on long-term cultural statistical learning, genuine predictive mapping can only be achieved using ecologically valid real-world musical stimuli. And so in this view, we find that the brain plus the body plus the environment creates a complete embodied listener. And so to accurately measure aesthetic pleasure, science should stop treating the listener as a disembodied cortex and start treating them as a fully integrated participant in musical expectation. So what this scoping review ultimately reveals is that we're not united by the acoustic notes we hear, but by our specific cultural backgrounds that dictate what one person may find beautiful, another might find completely dissonant. But what is universal is the biological engine beneath it all. We all process the world through a fully active brain. Longfellow was right in spirit, but incomplete in mechanism. What truly connects humanity isn't the acoustic notes, but the biological engine of prediction, error, and cognitive repair. And so we do this because music proves that we are biologically wired to find joy in learning and overcoming the unexpected. It connects us by demonstrating that within the safe, culturally situated boundaries of art, The intense physiological stress of being wrong is exactly what makes the resolution feel so profoundly right. Thank you. And I also had like a lot of references that I couldn't get on the slide, so the QR code if you ever want to look at them, just saying.
Question?
I'll first acknowledge I didn't understand half of it.
That's okay.
Okay. But what I got from you is that you probably did like a pre-research. So all these claims that you made towards the end of your research is something we probably need to research on. Is that correct?
Yes, so a lot of the stuff that was kind of being told here, that was mentioned in a lot of different articles. So the scoping review was taking about those 66 articles, examining each and every one of them, and then finding what was pretty much universal, and then also the big gaps that we found, with the biggest one being that they're separating the metabolic fuel kind of aspect of it, so our blood flow and how our blood responds, versus our electric aspect, so the EEG response. Because metabolic response versus electrical is about a 4-second delay overall. And so taking those both in actually will help us be able to determine how the response is going on in the brain. But near the end, with some of the things that are being said, the framework was proposed, and that's what this next project is actually planning to cover. And then the ending were some things that were found out just from the gaps in general.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I know this comes from a lot of like background research, and this is something you've been passionate about for a while, but what brought you to this research topic?
Yeah, actually, Doechie's song did. Okay. Anxiety was probably the biggest one that got me thinking, why? Why does our brain make it feel so uncomfortable? And it's also probably one of the things that I get the most response on when showing people. I took a different presentation to University of San Francisco, and I gave it to a neuroimaging lab, which was really cool. But there was a student, he was a senior PhD student, and he probably had the biggest reaction out of everything. And it's those tiny little responses of how music can bring out these different parts of people is what just makes me so in love with the idea of music cognition and how it works in our brain. But specifically for this one, it was more of just me being like, why the heck is Doechii doing this to us? And then it just became fun. But yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Do you think this can have any kind of medical implication?
Yes, so one of my things that I was kind of looking at with this project, and I mentioned it in my ERCAF presentation, but as we kind of taken a little bit of direction, one of the thoughts that I had was about PTSD individuals, and if individuals with PTSD have those, trigger moments that kind of cause those flashbacks, if we could possibly figure out how surprise actually works and how response to those fight or flight situations actually works, we could take that and we could go through some therapy. I would have to definitely dig deeper on how this could work, but I do think that being able to determine how surprise works and how it aligns with their fight or flight responses can help, especially within, we can do things like anxiety, sometimes even public speaking in that case, those different areas, but especially one of the biggest ones was about PTSD for sure. And I think we can go down there with music therapy, but I would have to do some more research into that for sure. Dr. O'Brien, that's my amazing mentor.
Thank you for working with Garrett. My pleasure. And she'll let you with pictures over there.
All right, thank you, Garrett. And our next presenter is the wonderful Nicole Tobias.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Tobias. I'm working under the mentorship of Dr. Patrick with the Department of Psychology, and today I will be speaking to you about the underdiagnosis of autism in Latino children of the Wichita metropolitan area. Autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder that causes social, communication, and behavioral challenges. In the United States, the prevalence rate for autism in children under the age of 8 is 1 in 31 children, with Latino children having a delayed diagnosis of that of 2.5 years, and white children being 20% more likely to be diagnosed than their Latino peers. Latino children are not only underdiagnosed, but many are misdiagnosed with ADHD as it has similar presenting symptoms as autism. Healthcare providers are also very likely to underdiagnose autism in Latino children as they have a lack of culturally affirming care, and language is an area that also causes diagnostic barriers as many places providing services do not have the appropriate assessment tools. The 3 barriers that I will be speaking to you about today are cultural beliefs, familial beliefs, service providers, and treatment. Stigma related to disabilities in the Latino community runs deep, with many members of the community associating disabilities with their child being stupid. There's also the social concept of machismo, which is the idea of a strong male in the household. Most father figures will disregard mothers' concerns about symptoms presenting in their child because they do not want to look weak upon society. This also causes a lot of shame and embarrassment in families, with many thinking that their children will not have a chance with marriage prospects. Spiritual beliefs like mal de ojo or an evil eye are usually related to the disability or illness in the child, as it is believed that an evil look to a person will cause said disability. There's also things like fatalismo, which is God's will. This is the idea that an illness or disability needs to be endured because it is God's will. Developmental milestones are also viewed differently by Latina mothers, with Latina mothers being 9 times more likely to report temperament first before any other behavioral concerns. Latina mothers also have significantly less knowledge about developmental milestones than white mothers, with many associating atypical behaviors as a personality trait or a cultural trait. Many Latino families also live in fear of receiving legal repercussions if they reach out for help. So they believe that if they go and get services, they could get in trouble because of their legal status. There's also a lack of empowerment and a sense of advocacy in interaction with the service providers. This usually occurs in Latina mothers, but there are groups around the country like that of LP, LSP, which help Latina mothers navigate around healthcare systems and the special education system to secure services for their child. In the healthcare system, there's a high need for not only bilingual, but bicultural providers, and many places, as said before, lack culturally affirming assessment tools. Because many tools are not translated, there's also a need for interpreters in the system. This causes a lot of frustration with families with limited English due to a lack of Spanish assessment tools, and they feel like they are being moved around from specialist to specialist without any clear communication or transparency. This also causes a lot of negative experiences and mistrust with healthcare providers, as many are dismissive and do not take into account any behavioral concerns that the parent might bring up, as they do not have the confidence to diagnose, because in Latino children, symptoms might be presented a little bit differently. Treatment hours, like that of applied behavioral analysis, are also an issue, as many families do not want to break their daily routines because of the rigorous hours in treatment. My interest in Latino children's autism diagnostic process roots from many family and friends' negative experiences with healthcare providers who weren't culturally competent. In my community, I know that there is a lack of knowledge, specifically in that of psychological and neurodevelopmental disorders. I would like to see culturally affirming care become the norm in the community, and my goal in my research is that the hardships of Latino children's diagnostic process with autism are reflected. My study hypothesized that the underdiagnosis and delayed identification of autism in Latino children is influenced by failures in the healthcare system, like that of a need of bilingual healthcare providers, lack of sufficient screening tools in Spanish, and a limited distribution and information about autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders in Spanish. For my project, data will be collected through an online survey provided in both English and Spanish. The questions in the survey are regarding to Spanish interpreters, nativity, and experiences with service providers. The target sample size is that of 70 participants, with eligible participants being caregivers of a child with autism, suspected or diagnosed autism, over the age of 18, and of Latino descent or origin. A quantitative approach will be taken in data collection and analysis, and results will be analyzed using SPSS as well as chi-square, t-test, and correlational analysis. Because there's likely going to be a low participation due to mistrust and fear of potential legal repercussions, the survey will remain anonymous. Because in Wichita, there is a smaller population of Latino children with suspected or diagnosed autism, the target sample size will remain at 70 participants, so there is enough data collected for the population. And because limited English can easily scare participants away, the survey will also be provided in Spanish. It is expected that participants will report an underdiagnosis and delayed diagnosis in the Wichita metropolitan area. Results will reflect the trends of that in literature, like that of a delay of 2.5 years in diagnosis in Latino children compared to white children. Because Wichita is a smaller city, it is most likely going to be reported that there's limited access to resources and longer wait lists because of a lack of specialists. In order for there to be a change, support needs to be shown to clients regardless of legal status. Places providing services needs to ensure that information is kept safe and let their clients know that there will be no negative consequences if they reach out for help. Raising awareness of autism symptoms can result in earlier diagnosis in Latino communities. This can be done spreading information, going into the community with culturally affirming education, and the classes usually being in Spanish or preferred language. There's also a need of recruitment and training of bilingual and bicultural experts to increase culturally affirming care, and communication between clients and the healthcare provider can also improve, as healthcare providers could catch onto symptoms before parents. Thank you. I'm now open for questions.
Hi.
Hello.
I just want to say I'm very, very glad that you're doing this research. Thank you for doing that. I was a special education teacher in Wichita schools previously, and I saw firsthand exactly what you're talking about. So thank you for doing this. That's very much a needed thing to be researching. And I guess my question is, did the people who responded to your survey, did those responses reveal what you were expecting?
So actually right now our survey is still finishing being developed, so we actually haven't gotten the responses quite yet. We did distribute the first version of one, but we noticed that a lot of the people didn't answer all of the questions, so we're having to go back and revise the questions in order to get adequate responses.
Great job.
Thank you.
I just want to say you were very brave to do and take this on, because you're dealing with some very cultural things. So I just want you not to give up on your dream and accomplishing this. But I do want you to focus on the cultural strengths of the community and not see it, because I think when you're dealing with culture, people may feel that there's shame if their child is diagnosed with autism or something like that. So you're going to have to do some education in the community, and then create tools that the community feels that they have empowerment with, because no one wants to get that diagnosis if they feel that way. But if it's been done together, they feel that there is some empowerment there.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, if it's done together, because some of the tools that are already in existence, their children may score high on it because it wasn't done from the perspective of that culture.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I mean, I know
Yes.
I'm sitting right next to the expert, but I think because if the diagnostic tool has been done on white children, it's not going to be accurate when it's done on African American children, Asian American children, or Hispanic Latino children. And of course, Hispanic Latino children, you could become from Cuba, you can become from Guatemala. And so those developmental milestones will look different in different cultures. So we need to be very careful in how we are viewing those children. So I can imagine a mother trying to decipher how is my child doing in those developmental milestones. And so then the whole community is, the grandmama is important, the father, of course I don't have the language right now, abuelo, everybody is trying to, nurture that child. Yeah. Does that make sense? And so you're gonna have to bring everybody along in developing that baby. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know you know this, but so we need to be careful how we take this along, because everybody's gonna be looking like, okay, wait a minute, I gotta protect whoever that is. Yeah. And then of course, you're going to educate then those service providers, because they don't necessarily know how to bring along the family in that diagnosis.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
Good morning, thank you. I plan to make this very quick, just one quick question. Once your pre-work and your research and your surveys have been completed and they're ready to present, are you planning on taking this into the local school systems or just community organizations only?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, once all of your pre-work is done on your research and your surveys and you're ready to actually test certain students for possible autism, for example, are you going to go into local school systems, for example, USD 259, or local community organizations and start there?
So I plan to do it all online, and that's going to be distributed through flyers in specific Latino places like carniceria, so Mexican grocery stores. And then a lot of the Latino community has a very strong Catholic faith, so getting permission from parishes to distribute those flyers as well. And I feel like that would give me the most accurate responses, just having to go into the community, because if I posted it per se online, I feel like there would be a lot of that negative stigma of what is being done with my information.
Hi, wonderful presentation, really enjoyed it. I'm gonna keep this quick, but I'm just curious, some of the things that I'm hearing, sounds like you have a relatively small population size, stigmatized group of folks, cultural sensitivities. Have you considered pairing your survey with like a different modality of engagement, maybe some structured interviews, some focus groups with Latina mothers, anything like that?
That is a great question. I have not looked into that, but I do plan on doing so.
I think you really should consider it. Given all of the characteristics of this study and the kind of engagement you need to do, I think that would strengthen it a lot.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Oh, yes, you can. All right. Thank you, Nicole. And our final presenter for Block 1 is Saria Castillo.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name's Saria Castillo, and before I begin, I just wanted to give a couple special thank yous, especially to my entire support system, as well as my research mentor, Dr. Christian Pedersen. I couldn't have done this without everybody's support. That being said, I would like to introduce my project. I conducted a critical discourse analysis on the ADAPT ICT Wichita Community Resilience Plan. For some background, I am a biological sciences major with the environmental, ecological, and organismal focus, as well as pursuing my undergraduate certificate in environment and sustainability. So you could say I am pretty passionate about the environment and our planet. Now, I'm sure we've all noticed the increase in extreme weather events around us. Welcome to global climate change. This change in weather patterns leads to damaged infrastructure and worsens public health, creating a need for local governments to respond. As the largest city in Kansas, reaching just about 500,000 residents, Wichita has an especially important need to respond quickly and effectively. So last year, the Wichita Public Works Department and the Wichita Sustainability Integration Board released a draft version of a climate adaptation plan called ADAPT ICT. This document describes environmental hazards that were identified using what they call a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. These include drought, extreme rain and flooding, extreme heat, and poor air quality, just to name a few. The document then provides recommendations on how to adapt to these hazards. There's also acknowledgement on that these impacts are not felt equally among residents of lower income, disability, and minority populations. However, something about this document just wasn't sitting right with me, so I turned to the literature. Arguably, the most common cause we hear about climate change today is the emission of greenhouse gases due to human activities. When we burn fossil fuels, those gases are then trapped in our atmosphere and warm the planet in what we call the greenhouse effect. Disaster studies and geographers take this one step further, arguing that many structural drivers are also to blame. This field tends to ask why society produces emissions and unequal climate impacts in the first place. Now, when I say structural drivers, this can include people that have to drive a car that produces emissions due to lack of transit options in their areas or safe bike infrastructure, or how lower income families may live in older homes that are poorly insulated and expensive to heat and cool. I also looked at scholarship on science communication, where it's been found that when experts hold these higher scopes of knowledge, they get to act as gatekeepers who then hold power to decide what information is shared and how. The public then gets to interact with this, shaping both how the science is understood and how the public will act in response. So as a place where climate change is experienced and reproduced, cities still remain understudied as a place where climate science, power, and public communication all intersect. So therefore, my project asks, how does a city's climate response then reflect these power dynamics? To find an answer, I looked at discourse studies, which examines how language shapes meaning, knowledge, and power. Rather than treating the plan as a neutral text, I approached it as something that actively constructs understandings of climate change and adaptation. To do this, I combined ideas from several key scholars, including James Paul Gee, Norman Fairclough, and Teun Van Dijk. Together, these scholars provided tools for examining language, framing, and the relationship between discourse and power. Critical discourse analysis was the common method that I found used to understand this relationship. So to do my own critical discourse analysis, I first identified recurring themes and language that stuck out to me. I then applied a couple of Gee's discourse tools, along with Fairclough's and Van Dijk's concepts of power and ambiguity, to analyze both what the plan says and what it doesn't say. My analysis then led to 4 aspects of risk that the plan appears to center. These are community of risk, location of risk, urgency of risk, and responsibility of risk. The text maintains a vague use of this term community, even in the title. Community concerns and community-wide goals are used to justify the hazards that are presented in the document, but it's never explained who this community really includes. Poor air quality is considered one of the risks to the city, using technical language such as ozone and particulate matter, framing the air quality issue as one that is more local. There is no discussion of global greenhouse gas emissions that are actively warming the planet. The recommendations provided by the plan are also considered voluntary or recommended goals, rather than something like policy that implies government oversight. The plan also provides recommendations for community safety, going as far as suggesting residents stay informed and prepared with an emergency plan. But there's no acknowledgement of how these steps are a privilege for those with access to these resources. Now, what does this all mean? So for community, it is never specifying the community that's providing feedback and concerns creates an image of a singular idea of climate resilience. This ignores the many different perspectives and unequal impacts found across the city of Wichita. And by choosing to focus only on local air pollutants, there is a separation of Wichita from the global issue that climate change really is. It doesn't leave any room for question on how global systems are driving this air quality issue forward. When using the voluntary and optional language, the severity of these climate hazards is reduced to just a condition that is present requiring adaptation rather than a pressing issue caused by human activities that's damaging infrastructure and harming people. Lastly, by simply suggesting residents create an emergency plan and stay informed, rather than providing resources and information on how to do so, the local government shifts the responsibility of action onto the residents that it's claiming to protect. So to conclude, the ADAPT ICT plan consistently frames climate change through technical and scientific language, identifying the environmental hazards and emphasizing adaptation. And while those are important, they shift attention away from the broader systems that produce climate change. This framing minimizes structural drivers such as the political, economic, the institutional factors, making climate change appear as a condition communities simply need to adapt to, rather than a problem rooted in governance and power. This matters because city communications influence how the city or how the public understands climate change, risk, and responsibility. The language these plans uses shapes who is seen as responsible for action and what kinds of solutions appear possible. Ultimately, I argue that future city climate responses should move beyond purely scientific and technical explanations to also address these structural drivers of climate change. Doing so can help cities develop adaptation strategies that are not only more effective, but also more equitable and better equipped to address the underlying causes of climate vulnerability. And my references. Thank you. Any questions?
All right, well, I'll get us started. This is a really unique project. I don't think I had ever heard of critical discourse analysis until you came to me and asked for help with writing about critical discourse analysis. So then I had to do a lot of learning on my own. But one thing I just wanted to ask about is what brought you to this project? You know, what made you decide that this specific plan was necessary for such a detailed analysis, I guess?
That is a good question. So something that brought me towards this was, I had been kind of aware that this plan existed. However, I also knew that most people here in Wichita did not. And then as I was going through it, there were, as mentioned, just some things that weren't really sitting right with me. I was reading it and I was like, I feel like we could be doing more to explain the issues and the causes. It just felt like it wasn't going below the surface of the weather's changing, let's fix our buildings. You know, that's kind of what it felt like to me. And so it felt like we needed almost a more thorough examination of it. And so when looking at literature about discourse studies, because I also had never heard of that, this is not my field of study necessarily, and so I had to also learn all about it. And it just seemed to be the more common method for identifying these themes of power and how to better communicate those to a public audience.
So I'm just really curious with what your next steps are with this, because I think what you just did was very valuable, not only to us in the room, but also to the people of Wichita and to the people who wrote it themselves, just kind of calling them out, saying, hey, you need to do more, and not just say, this is what this is, let's deal with it. So I'm just wondering what your next steps are. I don't know if you're wanting to go out and go talk to those people and see if you can work with them, or try to do community outreach to bring some people together and go do that, but I would just love to know what your plans are.
Yeah, so funny you mentioned that. My next steps kind of lined up almost with the same timeline as this project. I then did further research looking at this program, or looking at this document, specifically the lack of historical sites that are mentioned and how historical sites are not brought up and how that is very important culturally. But as far as taking it to a tangible change, essentially, I want to, you know, I had the relations with city officials that have put their hands on this work, and so I know that, like, it comes from a good place. I know that, and so I think it would be really cool maybe drafting up something for the city, just to be heard, or something that, you know, says like, hey, we should be doing just a little bit more. But I don't have much experience with anything of the sorts. And so, you know, hopefully down the road, once I get maybe more policy knowledge, more solid suggestions to bring, for now it's much more easier for me to be like, hey, this is maybe a problem. Don't necessarily have the answers, but working on it.
Hi. I know specifically regarding climate talks in Sedgwick County, there's been a lot of debate about the proposal of building data centers and things like that recently. Have there been any steps that ADAPT ICT has specifically taken to address public influence regarding this project?
That's a good question. At least at the time that this draft version was released last year, there was zero mention whatsoever about that direction. They do mention energy and how that is a big problem here in the city, or just, you know, we could be doing a little bit better with that. Their focus was more so on incorporating solar power rather than really touching on anything about the data centers. But that is, I would love to see them maybe comment on that. That would be really nice. I know this still sits as a draft. So hopefully maybe we hit the drawing board again and they can add some of those things too that are really relevant and affect our community.
In your research, did you get any opportunity to see other similar plans in similar cities?
I did not get the chance to dive into them. They do acknowledge that they base their plan on similar areas. So I know that they talk about, I believe, Oklahoma City, as well as a couple other cities that have made plans like this. But I did not actually go into those plans and look and see what they did necessarily. But that's a good question. Oh, fun. Thank you. And there you go. Thank you so much. Yay.
Okay, block one has come to an end. After photos, scholars, you now can leave and go stand by your posters. We're getting ready to start the poster presentation. So if you want to get up and go stand by your posters, If you look in your program books, I think it's like the third page in or so, it'll have the criteria for judging the posters. Each poster will have a scan code by it, so you are able to judge. And so we'll let them get out, and then so you can get up and go out into the corridors where we'll have our poster presentations, and then we'll meet back here in about an hour. It's about 10:40. Okay?
All right. I hope everybody enjoyed their time looking at the posters. Thank you for coming back in here for block 2 of our presentations. We're going to go ahead and get started. Our first presenter for block 2 is Sonia.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, so let's start. My name is Sonia Evota Mamadou. I'm doing the study on perceptions of artificially intelligent short-form content algorithms, and I'm doing the study under the guidance of Dr. Abdul Aziz Abu Shaid. And today I'll be presenting my study on how people perceive artificially intelligent social media algorithms and how these predictions affect engagement, trust, and watch time in the short-form content context. With platforms like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts becoming a central part of daily media consumption, understanding how people respond, perceive, and trust AI-generated content is increasingly important in our day and age. So, we judge information not just by the content, but its source, its origin, who said it, and where it came from. For example, teenagers may see information from their peers as more relevant or trustworthy than information from their parents or guardians, even if that content is similar. Likewise, two opposing news or political organizations could report the same facts, but users may engage with them differently based on reputation or their familiarity. This highlights that source of information can affect trust, credibility, and engagement. So, how do people decide to trust a source? When people decide to trust information, they usually rely on heuristics, which are mental shortcuts we use to do things and make decisions quickly, rather than doing a deep analysis every time. Some of these mental shortcuts that we can use include whether if the source that we're dealing with is human or automated, or even age differences between the source and the user, like the parent and teenager example from before. A study from Westerwick et al. Found that when users engage with sources they already disagree with, they process that information much more critically, even if that information is found to be more objective than the trusted source. This suggests that simply labeling a source as something different can significantly shape how people interact with the content at hand. Now, why is this important for a study on short-form content algorithms? Well, social media companies rely heavily on AI algorithms to curate and personalize content, especially in the For You style feeds. Users engage with these feeds daily, often not knowing how content is selected or prioritized for them. These algorithms are intentionally designed to maximize engagement, but the long-term success depends on users' trust. So, we don't know how perception of digital content algorithms affect perceived credibility, but what we do know is that AI algorithms increasingly curate social media feeds, and these source labels can influence credibility and judgment. An AI disclosure can reduce trust and sharing intention dramatically, and most studies examine these with singular AI-generated posts or news articles. Few studies examine how entire content feeds can change engagement and trust behavior. So this leads us to our research question. Does perceived content source influence engagement and credibility? Our hypothesis 1 is that AI-generated and human-generated feeds will produce similar engagement levels. Hypothesis 2, AI-generated feeds would be perceived as less trustworthy than human-created feeds. So, our methods. We did a between subjects experimental design with 73 undergrad students, ages between 18 and 30, with a mean age of 20.85. The procedure was that we had a set of 15 random videos selected from TikTok, and these participants would be randomly assigned to either TikTok, AI, or human at the start of watching the videos. They would be shown a disclosure saying these videos were picked from AI or human, or they were just picked from TikTok. As they watched, their watch time was collected, and after they completed a questionnaire assessing their trust and engagement. These data was then put into an ANOVA to test for differences between the 3 source conditions, and then there was a 2 keys HD post hoc comparison to identify specific differences. This was done through RStudio. So, our results. A Pari power analysis indicated that we needed approximately 159 participants to detect a medium effect size. We did not get to this, sadly, but next time we will get there for sure, because our sample size is N73, which was below this threshold, suggesting that the study may have been underpowered to detect small to moderate effects. But these results are still interesting. So, for engagement, we found that overall engagement was moderate with a mean of 2.93, standard deviation of 0.65, and our ANOVA found that there was no significant effect on source condition. Our p-value was, which we need a p-value of 0.05 to say it's significant. And in watch time, we also found no differences in viewing duration, which supports our first hypothesis that there'd be no differences. So yay! And then for trust, participants reported a moderate to low level of trust overall, which surprised me, as conditions had no significant effect on trust, which did not support our second hypothesis that stated that AI generated would be viewed as less trustworthy than human or just TikTok in general. So, what are these implications? These findings suggest that in practice, users may not actively attend to or evaluate the origin of content when interacting with social media feeds. Feed-level authorship may matter less than content quality, and platforms may be able to incorporate AI-generated content without substantial reduction in user trust, especially if quality remains consistent. So, our limitations. So, as stated before, we had a young undergraduate sample, which was majority female, 70%, and our videos were in a controlled viewing environment, which is different than how it would be in real life, where it's personalized to you, for you feeds, and our sample was underpowered. In the future, we want to increase statistical power by increasing our sample size, examine real-world personalized feeds, explore other emotional responses and personality, and study long-term exposure to AI content. In conclusion, this study examined whether perceived source of social media content, AI-generated, human, or algorithm-curated, influences users' trust, engagement, and watch time behavior. We found that engagement did not differ between conditions, and trust did not differ between conditions. These are my references, and I'm open for questions.
So one of the things that I think I found probably the most interesting is that there was actually, like you said, the moderate to low trust in social media. And I can't really put any assumptions on it, but just be kind of the world as it is today, what do you think the reason behind that low trust is whenever there is an expected kind of higher trust on social media and what other people are saying?
Well, social media in general isn't like real life. Everyone has their own like persona on there. So trusting in social media in general would always have a low trust because you can't believe what you see on the internet. That's what I believe.
Hi, that was fantastic. I loved how you put the scatter plot up of the data points. Yes. And I was wondering if you'd go back to that slide just for a second. So I'm wondering, it's always harder to argue for the null hypothesis when you didn't find the difference that you hypothesized. You found that the two groups were the same regardless of source. Do you think that means that there really is no difference, or do you think if you have another 100 participants or something that they're going to separate out and become statistically different groups?
Well, we don't know for sure, but we will study that next time in the fall. What I think maybe is it could be due to personality, but also use of social media in general also. I am a user of social media. It's one of my favorite things to do, but some people touch grass and they're outside. So maybe differences are because of that too. So maybe we need to assess personality and also use of social media as another variable.
Thank you. It's a very interesting study and really interesting results.
Yes.
All right, just make sure. Okay. So not my area of study, but I found it really interesting. So I have a daughter that's 11, and so it kind of makes me think of like the implications of this for other groups beyond, say, like undergraduates at a university. What do you think you might find if you looked across like different segments of society, even just here in Kansas or in Wichita or the broader U.S., like different age groups, demographics? Like, what was your thought on that?
Yeah? Okay. Let's start from the beginning then. So we focused on a younger age group. Our requirements was that our participants had to be between the ages of 18 and 30. We wanted to focus on that younger demographic, the Gen Z, millennial-ish kind of area, as they have more experience with social media. But maybe if we did like an older generation, we'd see like a difference in like maybe trust would be even lower or maybe trust would be even higher. I think separating it between ages would be really interesting, but also maybe between like education level could be interesting, or like career. People who are more into that like engineering, internet, computer would have maybe a difference than someone who's like a teacher per se. Yeah. If that answers your question. Thank you. Yes, he's right there.
You could come up.
Oh, a picture.
That way.
All right, our next presenter will be Lovely Williams.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying their day. To begin, my name is Lovely Williams, and I worked with my mentor, Dr. Kartikeya Subbu, in the anthropology department on my research proposal about political motivators in a polarized period. To begin, the U.S. political system operates in general that people are well informed about the legislation and policies, but research has shown that this is not the case and that there are many factors that go into a voting decision in the motivators. My study will focus on the factors of identity, personality, emotional, and social influences, and also highlight the role of misinformation during a polarized period and how it can reinforce biases and shape interpretations of political information. My study aims to expand on the understanding of political information and what information voters use to decide their votes and determine how they identify politically. Now moving into my literature review. I begin by analyzing personality, both voter and candidate personality. Per research that used the Big Five personality framework, it showed that openness, conscientiousness, and extroversion may increase someone's political interest. People who can be characterized as open may be more naturally curious, therefore open to different perspectives and political conversations. People characterized with conscientiousness may have a strong sense of duty, therefore they are interested for that reason. People characterized with extroversion may become interested because of the social reward that comes with being involved. This study shows that under the equal opportunity in a direct democracy, it does not equal to equal participation or interest amongst voters. For candidate personality, I broke this up into both external and personal. External meaning these are the personality traits given to a candidate via the media or outside sources. In a 2025 study, analyzing 20 interviews with a political leader, it demonstrated how communication tactics such as praise and emotionally charged language can be used to frame a leader as strong or competent. For personal, this is a persona or traits that a leader claims to have. So the use of hyperbole can be used to manipulate the truth and create humor out of a candidate or create an entertainer. This all creates and builds confidence in voters without much regard for the legislation or the policies that the leader supports. For my second motivator, I looked at social factors, such as social reward. When speaking of community validation and also to highlight the role of misinformation, researchers examined how polarization can increase the spread of misinformation and the desire of dominance amongst conservatives, more so than in liberals, building a sense of camaraderie amongst a group. So when they are all sharing their beliefs and perspectives, they kind of reinforce each other's beliefs. In the sense of belonging, someone who may feel forgotten by legislation, like a person of a minority group, may not on their own be politically involved or interested, but once they see that there is a social reward or that they can gain a community from being involved, they may develop the interest that way. And when speaking of emotions, another project examined how anti-democratic sentiments can emerge when there's a fear of loss of social and political power. To cite this study, it stated how they cited how a leader stated that demographic changes could transform white people into a minority of the U.S. population by the 2040s. This exemplifies how leaders can fuel fear and gain followers based off of the perceived fears that certain demographics have and say that they can protect from said fears. Moving into my third, identity. Moving into my third motivator, I looked into identity as a motivator. When speaking of racial identity, professors in Chicago examined how race can influence our interpretations of policies and which issues we deem important. For example, in this study, they examined the perceived threat to racial identity, and they used the example of white people who voted for legislation supporting mass deportation with the perception that others are a threat to their erasure, to the erasure of their race. And for political identity, no, for perceptions of national identity, there are varying perceptions of national identity within the United States. And I use an example from celebrities and influencers who we know have a strong influences on the masses, and people may vote certain ways based off their opinions without looking into legislation. In the media, there have been sentiments from influencers that people are fake citizens for openly criticizing the government, or, as they quoted, hating on America. This just goes to show how political messaging and misinformation can be easily spread, or different perceptions can develop based on one's identity. Moving into my methods, I will be conducting an extended ethnographic interview with one participant, and this is connected into a national study done with Princeton as the lead, and they are partnering with different universities in the United States to conduct these interviews and pull together the information. The criteria is to be a registered voter and self-reported as politically interested, and I will be using my themes to guide the interview, but I also want to look into, use the participant to develop other themes and to see what they deem as important. This study shows that voting behavior is very complex and cannot be simplified down to just objective understanding of policies. This seeks to gather a more holistic perspective of voting decision and political motivators through qualitative data, and to go beyond measuring political attitudes, but also to understand the perspective and lived experiences of citizens. To conclude, political interest is not primarily driven by objective understanding of legislation, but through personal experiences and subjective interpretation of the political information. I seek to close the gap between to lessen the gap between legislative needs and political motivators, and to contribute to the academic political conversations by connecting lived experiences to legislation. Thank you.
Any questions? All right.
I think your topic is super important, and I really like your project idea, and it's great that you're plugging into a large nationwide project. Hearing about it, I'm thinking that the way that you find your participants is going to be really important to, find a non-biased sample. So how do you plan to find your participants?
So I have acquired a participant already, and it was through existing social channels, and I wanted someone who wanted to be very forthcoming about their opinions and interpretations and their experience with politics. So I have a volunteer who wants to do the interviews.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. What I was thinking about is, okay, so what does it mean to be politically involved? So I'm thinking about, I know people who would be very concerned about all of these issues, but they didn't go to the No Kings rally because they were scared.
Yeah.
Versus the people who went because they weren't scared. Those people are going to have such different views.
Yes, and I actually want, both sides. I want to capture, when I'm thinking of politically involved, I'm thinking not necessarily of someone who feels like they know a lot about politics, because I want to, gain insight on how they feel how politics intersects with their lives and their experiences. The person that I chose, or that volunteered, he does feel as though he is knowledgeable about politics. And I'm not going to say whether he is or is not. That's not the goal of my research, but to just gain insight of their perspective, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that'll be really meaningful research. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions?
Yes, so thank you so much for your presentation. And I also similarly feel that it's going to be very impactful research. Could you walk us through just a little bit how you envision the ethnography unfolding as a method over these 3 years? Like, what are some of the activities that you'll do that will contribute to building the ethnography?
Yes, so for the interview, I want it to be more like a conversation. And so this is meeting in like a public area and just almost kind of talking about their schedule and just kind of to get to know them as a person, to build kind of like that baseline of trust and rapport, and then kind of going into more political specific questions to kind of weave in the information I'm looking for the study. And for like theme analysis, I'm looking at my motivators, but I also want to hear about what they deem as important, if that answers your question.
All right, thank you so much, Lovely. Our next presenter is Afin Mora Bruce.
Alrighty. Let's talk about some nature. Or as Sonia likes to say, let's touch some grass. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Afin Mora Bruce. Today I'll be presenting spatiotemporal distribution of fish and amphibians in intermittent streams. My research was carried out under the guidance of Dr. Thomas Luring. Thank you for having me, and let's get started. Now, there's a couple of terms that do a lot of the heavy lifting in this talk, the first being spatiotemporal. Spatiotemporal is just two different terms put together, space and time. So spatiotemporal distribution about animals is simply where they were found and when. Neither dimension necessarily tells the whole story alone, but rather the interaction between the two that does. Now that we know the when and where, let's talk about the system itself. Intermittent streams. Intermittent streams are not broken down or degraded rivers, but rather predictable systems that are driven by rainfall, groundwater depth, and geology. Now, these are not uncommon. They are actually 51 to 6% of all the waterways in the world, global streams, are made up of these intermittent systems. Now, other than its commonality, another reason it is very important to understand these intermittent streams is that they are among the first ecosystems to show environmental stresses. They're very climate sensitive. Between climate change and human water use, the intermittency has been expanding, and understanding these systems is very important, especially for us in Kansas. 81% of all Kansas waterways are made up of intermittent streams. A place like the Flint Hills, for example, is a great area to learn about these streams between its prairie climate variability and the local geology. It's an ideal natural laboratory for studying these wetting and drying cycles, which is exactly why we chose the Flint Hills as our study site for this study. At the Youngmeyer Ranch out in the Flint Hills of Kansas, Wichita State has a biological field station out there that has been sampled over the past few years. The sampling framework covers 7 different streams and 158 total pools. These pools were originally selected at the very first sort of survey that was done out at this location by Wichita State researchers. And I am following that exact same system, same pool, same streams, but this study follows it in the spring, not in the summer. The rest have all been in the summer. And this is important. The summer and the spring are going to look very different when it comes to these intermittent streams. In the summer, you're going to see a lot less water. It's going to be much more fragmented. Jake Wright at Wichita State University is one of the few that have studied out there and done surveys. And this is one that I follow along in this study. In the spring, there's going to be much more water. Water is going to be at its highest. It's going to be the most connected. So we wanted to really look at this gap, the gap between summer and the spring. And that's what this study follows, that the different hydrological connectivities and conditions. In terms of the approach of this study, there are 7 different streams and 158 pools that were sampled over 6 days. Each pool had its own GPS coordinate that was used through satellite imagery. So first we would go to the pool through satellite imagery. We would find the GPS coordinate and locate the pool. Then we would photograph the pool. And then after that was done, we would get pool characteristics. This would be things such as whether the pool was wet or dry, right? Did it have water? Then from there, we would do vegetation litter, canopy coverage, if it was connected to a different pool, how strong was that flow, things like that, so we can understand exactly how the pool looked at the time of sampling. Once that was done, the pool would then be sampled through seines, big seines for more deeper, larger pools, smaller seines for smaller pools, and dip nets like the one in the photo for much more shallow, difficult areas to get. If any vertebrates were captured, we would identify them to the species level, measure the species, and then count the overall quantity of them. Obviously, we would then release them safely back to where they were located. Getting to the results here, we're looking at the connectivity of the water and the fish distribution. 86.7% of all the pools in the spring were connected. Compare that to the summer of 2023, only 67.5% of them were connected. The fish were found in 33 of the 158 total pools, 21%. And this was found in the most stable streams, the ones that were more connected. The most dominant species were the central stone roller and the orange throat darter there. And although in the spring, with the more connected waters and pools, there was less fish distribution than in the summer, even though the summer had much more fragmented pools. This might sound counterintuitive, but even though there was more connectivity, it was still earlier in the season. The fish hadn't had enough time to go downstream and populate these pools. Amphibians and their breeding activity. You see, frogs, they tell a very different story. They were the most widespread group overall, found in all 7 streams. They were found in 82 of the 158 total pools, and the Plains leopard frog and the Blanchard's cricket frog were the most dominant species here. Egg masses were recorded in every stream as well, but they were almost never found in pools that also occupied fish. And you see, that is actually sort of the core finding of this whole study, that it's very unlikely to find amphibian frog eggs in the same areas as fish. In a stream that's much more connected, you will see a lot more fish. And where you see a lot more fish, you will typically see little to no areas that are located with frog egg masses. And vice versa, a stream that has no fish that has much more isolated pools is a great place for these frogs and other amphibians to breed and lay their egg masses. When you have isolated pools without fish, it's sort of a predation-free refuge for these amphibians to lay their eggs. And here's a very simple graph that shows that relationship. ES4 was a stream that had the most fish, over 90 fish, and only had 1 egg mass. You take that to a different stream, G3NF. It was located with many isolated pools. It actually had no fish at all. So the amphibians and the frogs were like, hey, this is where we want to lay our eggs because these fish are going to be eating the frog eggs. Now, comparing the two seasons, we have spring versus summer. Fish occurrence dropped from 58% of pools in the summer down to only 21%. However, the connectivity between these pools switched. It went from 67% in the summer to 87% in the spring. So that mosaic really does flip between the seasons. It is not random. However, one thing to focus on here is that this was the very first time that's ever been recorded in the spring. So this is sort of a snapshot rather than multiple years of straight up data. So going further, understanding and recording more in the spring over multiple seasons and multiple years is going to give us a better understanding of exactly what it looks like in the spring. Putting these things together, there's a couple things to look at. First, it's the system itself. Connectivity, fish predation, and vegetation structure interact to shape this system. The fishless pools are great for amphibian refugia, and the connected pools serve as fish corridors, ways to go in and out. And this mosaic shape shifts seasonally. It's not random. It's connected in the spring but fragmented in the summer. And this tells us that a healthy stream does not necessarily mean one that's always flowing, but rather these streams are allowed to be fragmented to dry out, and that's simply just part of its system and of how it functions. It's also important to understand that this value is at risk. Currently, between climate change and human water use and human activity, these already intermittent systems are becoming less and less predictable. The intermittency is expanding, and it's very relevant for somewhere like Kansas, where over 80% of our freshwater waterways are made up of these intermittent systems. Thank you very much. I'm now open for questions.
So the study was in the spring and the past was in the summer. What do you think the differences are in the winter and the fall?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When we went in the spring, I don't know if you guys remember the spring, but there was a week in there where it went from about 15 degrees to like 90.
Yeah.
So we got there on the 15-degree day. So on the very first day, all the pools that we located, we had to break the ice because there was ice. I mean, it was 15 degrees, right? So intermittent streams are going to be they're going to vary significantly. A lot of them are going to be somewhat permanent, right? Water that you're going to see very often, while some are going to actually dry out completely. So in the winter, for example, some streams are going to have water, and there's going to be species that are able to live within waterways that are, covered with ice. And then there's some areas that in the winter it's going to be completely dried up, but that's part of how the system works.
If I'm not wrong, you said that you conducted this study early in spring, right? So as the spring progresses and we go into summer, do you think that dynamic will change about the concentration of fish and the frog eggs?
Yeah, so That's a great question. So like last month, not too long ago, we actually went out to the same site and did the same, everything the same. Same pool, same streams, and we saw the exact same, well, very similar to past summers about how the fish, amphibians, and the pool connectivity looks in the summer. And that's sort of where we're going to go next, is compare the spring and the summer of the same year and see how it looks. But it'll probably be similar to the past summer data. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Afin. All right, now I welcome up Kaya Russell.
Hello. Okay, my name is Kaya Russell. I worked under the mentor of Dr. C. Brendan Clark. I'm a psychology student, and we did our research over social media addiction in histrionic and borderline personality disorder. So pretty much to start, a lot of what is in the DSM when it comes to addiction tends to be substance-based addictions. Substances like alcohol or cocaine, these tend to be way more documented within the DSM and in research, more than they are behavioral addictions. And some of these behavioral addictions would be things like gambling, which is the only one that is currently within the DSM. But one of these potential behavior addictions may be social media. And we know that social media is increasingly popular. It is being used daily. People need to have some sort of internet use, which means that social media is going to be on their phones anyways. And using this social media could lead to an addiction because of how often people use it and the negative mental health that can come from it, like anxiety or depression. And one thing that we wanted to look at was how social media addiction and personality disorders can correlate with one another. And how we did this, or the reason why we did it, was to, again, see if there were connections between them. And we used 3 hypotheses, kind of all in the same line of borderline personality disorder, histrionic, and the narcissism dark triad being correlated with social media addiction. And therefore, people who have more of these symptoms are going to have a higher correlation with social media addiction. Now to get in how we did this, we used Amazon's Mechanical Turk. We had 18 plus participants, which was 511, with a majority being male and a majority being white or Caucasian. We used a multi-questionnaire survey, which we hosted on Qualtrics, and we looked at things like personality disorders, of course, impulsivity, Big Five. And to analyze it, we used a Pearson's correlation and a linear regression. And to look a little further into those questionnaires, we used a basic demographic questionnaire for things like age and sex. We used the Bergen Social Networking Addiction Scale. This is for social media addiction. We did the short dark triad, which we specifically looked at narcissism. The Barrett Impulsivity Scale for impulsivity. The McLean Screening Instrument for borderline personality disorder, the Personality Belief Questionnaire, which uses personality traits that you feel that you have and measures it. And then we did the Big Five, specifically extroversion and neuroticism. And pretty much what we were able to find was that they were correlated with social media addiction. For things like social media, it goes with impulsiveness, narcissism, the personality beliefs, BPD, and the Big Five. All of them at a 0.001 level or the 0.5 level with Big Five. Impulsiveness was the personality belief, BBD, and Big Five. And then finally, for personality, borderline personality disorder, we had the PBQ and the Big Five. And looking further into the regression, we found that there was significance with factors of social media addiction, extroversion, neuroticism, the personality disorders, and narcissism. And specifically, histrionic was the only one that was significant at a 0.001 level when compared to social media addiction. And pretty much what all these fancy numbers mean is that the hypotheses in the beginning were proven true. And for some of the reasons for why they would be for borderline personality disorder, impulsiveness is already a part of the diagnosis. So it's no question that impulsiveness would be correlated with borderline personality disorder. And it makes sense that it would go with social media addiction, because if you don't have that impulse control, you're more likely to spend more time on social media, because social media, it can give you a dopamine hit. It feels nice to be able to just scroll easily. It is a very easy task to do, so you're going to do it more. For things like narcissism and histrionic, for those who don't know what histrionic is, it is a personality disorder, obviously, where it's kind of more attention-based. You're going to do things that might be outrageous to get attention, which is what social media can provide. It is very easy to go on things like TikTok and see people doing things like giving, whether it's good, like giving to charity, or bad, like wasting food and making big messes that nobody would eat, because they know that people are going to engage with that kind of content. And for narcissism, when I was reading over the literature, there were multiple theories, such as the fact that social media allows you to take photos of yourself. You can get you can make people perceive you in a specific way that's going to make people interact with you more, which is going to feed into that narcissism. And then finally, looking at the personality traits from the Big Five, extroversion. If you're an introvert, you like being with people, you like talking to people, and social media allows you to do that 24/7 with people all around the world. So obviously you're going to spend more time because you get to engage with people more often. And for neuroticism, social media tends to have a lot of bad news on it. It can cause things like anxiety and depression, which has already been seen from other research. So if you are more, like the more neurotic you are, the more likely you are to essentially what is called doom scrolling. So yeah, some of the limitations I found was that we used Amazon Mechanical Turk, and I am not sure how popular of a service that is. We did see that a majority was middle-aged. There wasn't a lot of younger people who used that site. And also, we saw that the racial demographic was not great for seeing how this might be affected within different cultures, as a majority, like over 99%, were white. And so to look at some further research that could be done, just social media addiction and personality disorders in general, because if people who on a non-clinical scale are getting these type of results, then we can only imagine what's happening to people who actually do have a diagnosis. And then also looking at the personality belief questionnaire, because if you believe yourself to be impulsive, then you're more likely to fall into impulse-based addictions, because you don't even believe that you have the ability to fight that impulse. And just to conclude, personality disorders are very significant with social media addiction, and there should be more research over it, because if there is more research, then we can get ways for sites to possibly pass laws that stops people from just being able to scroll, that allows for things like clickbait to be absolved in some form or way, simply so that we can help people who either have these disorders or not to not spend so much time on their screens. These are all my references, and now I'm open to questions.
First of all, great presentation. And you may have said this, so I apologize, but could you elaborate a little bit more on what the Big Five are?
Yes, so the Big Five, they are personality, it's kind of a generalization of personality traits that everyone is supposed to have. Like I said, we have the extroversion and neuroticism, but there's also openness, conscientiousness, I believe I said that right, and agreeableness. And the idea is that if you exhibit more of one specific trait, then you're more likely to have different behaviors. So like neuroticism, if you're more likely to be a neurotic person, then you're more likely to be an anxious or depressed person.
Gotcha, thank you.
Well, I know you were lucky enough to have all your hypotheses proved true, but did you have any results that were particularly surprising during your research?
If I remember correctly, I think the sex ended up not being that big of a factor. That also could be because a majority of them were male, but it did not seem to differentiate on whether or not someone had a specific disorder or not, or disordered traits, especially which is surprising because things like borderline and histrionic tend to be diagnosed more in females.
Okay, great study, by the way. I don't know if I heard you before, but did you explain what you counted as social media addiction?
Yeah, so we based it off of the Bergen social networking scale, and that is kind of the scale used for social media. And so the higher the score they got, the more we kind of use that as social media addiction.
What kind of items were in it? Like questions were in that scale?
Basic questions like how much time spent on social media, why you use social media, things like that.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thank you, Kaya.
Yes, Dr. Clark, if you could come out, please. Good job, thank you. Thank you. Go there and get photos.
Now I welcome up Jaden Island.
At some point within most of our lives, we'll come into contact with a woman who tells us her birth story. Whether she's recounting a mad dash to the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning or the chilling satisfaction of ice chips on an empty stomach. This is not just a way for us This is not just a way for her to tell us about the interactions that she had in the hospital or complain about the dry chicken that she was served. But instead, this form of storytelling is a sociological telltale of the types of experiences and underlying concerns that may be going on within a hospital network. And even furthermore, tells us about the stories and the systems that may be in place in working against a woman before she even steps foot in the door. Today, we're going to be talking about educational interventions in maternal fetal medicine by particularly drawing light upon respectful maternity care as a framework and a foundation through which we can seek more person-centered care. Today's discussion will occur in two different parts. We'll first begin by talking about underlying and ongoing threats that are happening in maternity care, by secondarily moving forward to discuss specifically how respectful maternity care serves as a care intervention, speaking about its efficacy and the future steps we can take to cement it as the key towards respectful maternity care. To begin, we have to start by defining what maternity care is. Maternity care is centralized as a description of the types of care, practices, and interventions a woman, her children, her partner, and other sorts of families receive during childbirth, pregnancy, and the postnatal period. The United States has cemented itself as a nation that spends a significant portion of its GDP in healthcare spending on maternity care, with $165 billion of healthcare spending each year going towards maternal health. However, there still remains significant disparities in the types of care and health outcomes that happen among racial divides. You can see before me on the screen, there is a large disparity between negative healthcare outcomes and specifically maternal deaths that happen among Black mothers in comparison to their white, non-Black, Hispanic, and Asian counterparts. Many researchers believe that these barriers and negative healthcare outcomes are due to four key things. The first is a lack or shortage of physicians. Particularly in rural areas like Kansas, these shortages of physicians can be due not only to training outcomes, but can also be due to incentivizations for nursing and other early healthcare professionals to enter the field. The second barrier that has been attributed is the elimination of federal public healthcare programming. This can look like the decrease of funding for programs like WIC and other sorts of public health initiatives that are geared towards helping women of a low income status to continue seeking care in alternate ways. Another barrier includes a lack of care options. Many women during the prenatal period aren't aware of the options of seeking out care through people like midwives and doulas, and thus are less likely to seek out those alternate care options. And lastly, this includes poor health education and prenatal care options. Many women have been identified through the Kansas Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System as not knowing the options that they have in terms of prenatal health, or really not being exposed to health education opportunities in terms of things that they can do to ameliorate their health position. However, the literature is clear that there are two additional barriers that many physicians deem to identify in the way that they interact with patients. The first is physician mistrust. This can be defined as the historical withholding of treatment and perceived discrimination across racial divides. I encourage us all to think back to the non-consensual and unmedicated gynecological experimentation that happened on enslaved Black women through the supposed father of gynecology, Dr. J. Marion Sims. Even further, physician mistrust can look like violations of public trust through the dissemination of categorically false medical information, such as ongoing medical discussions or perceived medical information that Black women experience pain at a lower threshold than that of their white counterparts, which is generally untrue. We see that in Kansas alone, between 17 and 30% of women have directly reported mistreatment from physicians as a cause of their race or ethnicity. Or even others, up to 45% of women sharing a reluctance to give those concerns to physicians to fear of retaliation or mistrust. Even further, we see that there are significant racial implications for these barriers that we've witnessed. Between 21.9 and 28.9% of mothers in Kansas have experienced discrimination directly as a result of their race. But even further, generational patterns of racial discrimination going back 2 or 3 generations within African American communities is associated with greater connectivity between neural pathways in the brain and accelerated cell aging. What this essentially means is that through these generational patterns and epigenetic bindings, we see that women in the modern age have lower thresholds to be able to respond to stress, increasing their ability to develop postpartum depression or psychosis and other sorts of complications during pregnancy. This evidence suggests that these poor maternal health care outcomes are not just due to a lack of care options or public health programming, but directly due to racial discrimination from physicians. We can see that the altered intrauterine environment from these epigenetic bindings can directly lead to pregnancy complications like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, or depression. We can even see that systemic racism that happens on hospital system levels, as well as racial differences in socioeconomic status, can directly lead to differences in health outcomes for these populations. With that, we have to take a pause. We see that there are clear disparities, but what educational interventions or other steps are we taking to overcome these barriers? And the answer is respectful maternity care. RMC has cemented itself as a foundational approach to care and a framework through which we're able to emphasize the fundamental rights of women and their families when we're interacting with patients. Respectful maternity care has 6 main pillars to include things like accountability, as well as shared decision-making and informed consent that allows the physician to change the way that they think about their interactions with patients in order to provide more patient-centered care. However, the successful implementation of respectful maternity care and its practices is not just dependent on reliance upon these pillars, but however, necessitates accountability from governments, facilities, and providers whose responsibility it is to reduce instances of mistreatment and abuse for patients. The benefits for patients are manyfold, but the most significant of these is autonomy and respect in the decision-making process by allowing physicians the confidence to include patients in every step of the decision-making process. But there are also benefits for professionals. When patients share more higher levels of satisfaction, this can include professional distinctions for physicians, as well as enhanced clinical skills and knowledge when they're interacting with patients. With that, we can see that there are still future steps to be taken to ensure that physicians understand the necessity of respectful maternity care within maternal fetal medicine. This includes pre-test, post-test tools as evaluative measures through which we can seek to understand how physicians' interpretations of patient experiences can be altered by direct exposure to RMC curricula. This also allows us to establish temporal precedents or elements of cause and effect, as well as gives us the ability to validate these techniques qualitatively or quantitatively. Even furthermore, we can use the themes and other sorts of things that come up in terms of responses that physicians have after exposure to the curriculum in order to interpret approaches that they have to the care practice or even see themes and relations to the measures that occur within the study. Some examples of things that may be asked in these sorts of mixed methods approach that include both semi-structured interviews and survey tools themselves, we want to ask physicians what sorts of experiences have they had interacting with patients in the past, or what supports do they know to exist in hospital care networks to take care of these sorts of patients that have communicated these sorts of problems. We also want to ask what physicians' priorities are when it comes to interacting with patients, how they might believe RMC to improve healthcare outcomes, and whether or not they believe disrespect and abuse from physicians to occur in the first place. The significance of this study proposal includes not only improved care outcomes for women and increased patient satisfaction scores, but also allows us to implement evidence-based care management strategies for physicians and hospital networks, allows us to develop appropriate implementation methods for RMC and other sorts of thematic curriculum, and finally allows us to minimize health access constraints for socioeconomically disadvantaged populations. In summarization, today we're able to understand not only that respectful maternity care is significant in its impacts for health in general, Secondarily, we're able to specifically see how respectful maternity care and implementations of similar practices allow us to develop clear strategies for patient satisfaction and trust building. And finally, through the application of the proposed study design and the dissemination of findings towards local partners like the Kansas Birth Equity Network, we're able to cement respectful maternity care, not just as a means of ameliorating care practices, but truly as the key for maternal fetal medicine in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, incredible. I'm curious if you find in your study that RMC seems to be like an effective intervention. As you may know, like our healthcare system has so many obstacles to serving patients. Do you anticipate that there would be any obstacles in the structure of our healthcare system that would limit our ability to distribute this intervention amongst professionals?
Yeah, I think that one of the things you talk about, so care access restraints, when we think about ratios between physicians and patients and time constraints, bureaucracy, charting, all these other things that are working against a physician and their ability to deliver adequate care, I think one of the important distinctions and one of the things we've noted in terms of applying this intervention is potentially looking towards early education. So when we're exposing those that are early in their nursing career to this type of curriculum, allowing them early ways and coping strategies and mechanisms through which they can interact with patients so as to decrease or minimize their ability to carry out disrespect and abuse in the future. I think when we talk about those that are currently in the space, I think one of the most motivating factors would be to incentivize physicians to be exposed to the curriculum through things like continuing education units that are already required for them to keep up with their credentials. And so I think that's one of the many ways that we can incentivize physicians to be not only exposed to the curriculum, but to improve their care practice and clinical skills and knowledge in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I really like your respectful maternity care program. I think that sounds wonderful. I was wondering, have you considered including nurses in your intervention, since, at least in a labor and delivery setting, the majority of the patient's time will be with the nurses and only a small bit with the physicians?
Yep, our educational interventions are actually geared towards nurses. I think that those are some of the first populations, kind of for the same reasons that you talked about, because they are going to be spending a lot of the time with patients. You know, those within labor and delivery are really not seeing the doctor until seconds before your baby's coming into the world. So I think that focusing on nurses and the education that they're receiving in terms of interacting with patients and minimizing some of those negative health outcomes and responses is one of the more stringent and important strategies that we've identified. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you're super smart for using continuing education as your medium. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jaden.
Thank you.
Here we go. That brings our presentations to an end. Let's give a round of applause to all of our scholars. Great job. Okay. Okay, we're going to go on and move ahead before we go to the luncheon and do the LaWanda Hopefield Advocacy Award. This year's recipient of the LaWanda Hopefield Advocacy Award is someone who's been a big supporter of the McNair Scholars Program for well over 20 years. Dr. Rhonda K. Lewis has been a research mentor, has taught research methods course for us, and has also shared her personal journey of getting her doctorate. She's always willing to help always smiling, spreading positivity around for us, and has been a great supporter of us. So I would like to congratulate you, Dr. Rhonda Lewis, and please come up and share a few words.
Thank you. I just feel so honored to be here and accept this wonderful award. So I just want to thank the staff. Can the staff just please stand? So thank the staff. I was so shocked when I got that email, because I just want to thank you all for considering me. So thanks to the staff. I'm just so honored to receive this award in honor of Dr. LaWanda Hope Fields. She was the glue for my sorority, and she was the glue for McNair. And so I just am so honored that I'm receiving this award today, because she's leaving behind this wonderful legacy for McNair, and it's stronger than ever. So thank you for running it the way that she would want it to be ran. So just can you give her a hand clap for that? You're upholding the ideals and the way that the program is continuing to grow. So I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Ronald E. McNair, and I'm so glad that you have some of the things about him, because I just think that we don't say what his legacy is enough. And so I wanted to kind of talk about him, because he's an amazing person. And so you're standing on the shoulders of a person that we all want you to live in his legacy, because the Ronald E. McNair is a wonderful program. So I wanted to use, your program highlights, his, what he did. And so I just think he's an amazing person, because he has a PhD in physics. That's pretty incredible. I mean, you just don't walk around and run into a bunch of physicists every day. And I wanted to highlight too, he's a member of the Divine Nine, which is Omega Psi Phi. So he was very giving in his community. The Omegas believe in community service, and they stand in excellence. So you also highlighted in your program, he played the saxophone. I mean, so very talented, just what he did. 5th degree black belt in karate, and of course being an astronaut. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that even though we want you to go on with your research and get a PhD, the whole point is that you're being well-rounded. And that's what we want you to focus on. Getting a PhD is wonderful, and we want you to get your education, but enjoy life, and that's kind of what he did. And so I want you to think about that. We're pushing you for these other things, but enjoy your life, but also get that education. So I just wanted to kind of give you my background a little bit. I'm a first-generation college student. I went to Wichita State, and I'm a proud Shocker. So kudos to Shocker Nation. And I just want to, I'm not going to talk a lot or a long time, but I remember when I was going through my own process of being a student, I wanted to be an attorney when I first was here as a psychology major. And I remember telling my students as I made that shift, I was always a psychology major, but I wanted to be that attorney. I wanted to be Perry Mason. And then when I finally made that shift to say, hey, I want to be a psychologist. I wanted to be a clinician at first. But then I was sitting in my class, and Dr. Myason was teaching his class, and it was social psychology. And he said, do you want to change the world? And do you want to make a difference? And I was like, well, what field is that? And he said, community psychology. And I said, okay, I want to be a community psychologist, and I want to, make a difference in people's lives. But then through that, I wanted to become a professor. And so I decided to be a professor. And I remember telling my family and friends that I wanted to be a professor, and they laughed, and they were like, well, nobody in our family's a PhD. Nobody's done that before. What does that look like? And I was like, well, I want to do this. And I remember I'm getting a lot of pushback from my cousins at the time. And they laughed and they were like, well, nobody's can do that. And I was like, well, I'm going to do it. And I remember that being a real problem. And then I was told by my professors, well, you don't write well. You're not a good writer. And so I remember going, okay, well, you're not going to encourage me to write better or do better or and so I was like, okay. So, so one of the things that professors have to do is, what do we have to do, professors? We have to write a lot. You have to also read a lot. And so I was like, well, okay, so how am I going to get around these barriers, right? So professors have to write and publish and conduct research. And so I was like, well, I don't care what people say. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I know that many of you suffer from imposter syndrome. So what's this okay, so hold up your hand if you're an imposter syndrome situation person. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so I know this is a real thing. Now, I never had this, and so I cannot really relate to you. And I'm not saying that I don't have self-doubt. We all have self-doubt. We all waking up in the middle of the night. I get that. But I cannot deny that this doesn't exist, this imposter syndrome. But, that concept, I don't understand. But I get self-doubt in those situations and all that kind of stuff. But anywhere I go to, I belong. So I don't get that. When I walk into a room, I don't care if it's Prince, King Charles, Prince Charles, whoever. My father taught me not to be intimidated by anyone, so I'm not intimidated. So anyway, but I do have some advice for McNair students, because I had so many haters from my family members and even from my professors, because they told me, you cannot write well. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll overcome that barrier. So, but you can't tell me what I cannot do. So along my journey, I had to believe in myself. So that's how I was able to overcome, my deficits. I just had to believe in myself and what I couldn't do. I just was like, well, I'm sure my professors had to overcome their issues. And so when I talked to my professor, Dr. Meissen, who I told you, who was one of my mentors, he was like, oh yeah, I had a hard time writing and it's hard. And I was like, oh, okay. So you just kind of have to work at it? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect. So believing in yourself is how you have to do it. So my parents also believed in me, and so I was like, okay, cool. So if I believe in me, plus they believing in me, okay, that's a magic number. So those nights of self-doubt, those long nights of studying, staying up late, I had to believe that I could achieve. So just remember that, right? So we all have that self-doubt. That's a normal part of growing up and being human. But I do want to leave you with this poem. This is something that now this is a crisis mode, right? I have doctoral students that I've had all summer long, so faculty do work in the summer, or at least I do. And my students are always coming to me with, oh my gosh, this isn't gonna work out. Oh my gosh, my study participants are not gonna happen. And there's always this wall with them. And this is the poem that I always give to my students, all my doctoral students. So this is what I share. It's called Don't Quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low, and I'm sorry, you're a college student, the funds are low, and they're even lower now with this inflation and all these other things. The debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is strange with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure comes about when you might have won had you stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell just how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seem worst that you must not quit. So that's my advice to you, okay? So believe in yourself, because that's what I had to do. Because like I said, I had a whole bunch of haters. But now my haters are my biggest motivators. Thank you very much. And thank you for the award.
Okay, we're stalling. They're setting up for lunch, so we're going to go ahead and do our poster awards. So we're going to find out who won the posters. So I'm going to start with 3 and work my way up, okay? Third place, it goes to AFIN. You can give it. You can go ahead. Yeah, put it around and go get your picture. Second place, Garrett. And all the posters were great. They really came out nice. I really enjoyed them. Good job. And our first place award goes to Surya. Congratulations. And you guys all could go up and take your picture. She can take all of you. Okay, you can do yours next.
That's funny. All right, so we're still running a little bit ahead of schedule and lunch is still not ready yet, but we're going to continue with the rest of our awards. So the Commitment Award is one who always strives to reach goals, stays focused on task at hand, and is determined to be successful. And this year we had 2 students who we believed deserved this award, and that is Saria and Jaden Island. Our next award is the Attitude Award, and this student is one who takes constructive criticism and feedback with a positive attitude, willing to work hard, and who is enthusiastic in learning to better their research skills. And this award goes to AFIN. Our star performer encompasses the other standards, achieves academically, keeps a positive attitude even when challenged, committed to being successful, and is determined to meet the goals of graduating and attending graduate school. This award goes to Garrett Knight. Our Academic Excellence Award goes to the student with the overall highest GPA for this academic year, and that is Braden Miller. Our next and final award is the Achievement Award, and this student produces quality work, goes above and beyond expectations, achieves high standards, and is recognized outside of the program, and that also goes to Braden Midler. I shouldn't have had you sit down, sorry. We can take All right, right now, as lunch is finishing being set up, we would like to take a group picture of all of our researchers up here at the front, please. And then if anybody needs to take a restroom break, lunch should be ready within 5 minutes. And we appreciate you guys all being here.
Yep, this concludes our program outside of luncheon, so we are most appreciative of you all attending. Scholars, excellent job. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will, lunch is going to be in the other room, but if you can bring them back in here and hang out, that would be, there's more space here, so thank you for attending.
We could probably have them in that corner or with the white background.
I love that this is behind us.
Yeah,
But
we can
she-
do that.
I don't know if she. Oh, okay. She's testing it to see if we can have the logo in the picture.
Researchers, please come up to the front for a picture. Researchers. Who are we missing? Garrett, Braden, Tanya, Saria, Aven. Who else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's it.
Make sure you guys have a window, so actually, the back row, I'm gonna have everybody scoot over. 1, and then scoot up. And then scoot up. I got you.
Oh.
And then
Get closer.
scoot up.
Yeah.
You'll probably have to, scoot up, and then I'll have you come up. And then come on this way.